As some of you probably know, I was away last week for American Thanksgiving with some family in the Detroit area. And it was lovely, both the feasting and the family. And I am so blessed to be living in Canada, where I get Thanksgiving with all the trimmings in October. And then in November, I get to do it all again with American friends and relations. I'm not actually a huge fan of turkey, but I do love me some Thanksgiving side dishes, the stuffing, that green bean casserole, corn pudding. Did I mention the stuffing? Yeah. In years past, most Thanksgivings, I would make the 2-day pilgrimage to see my mother in the tiny little town of Benton, Illinois, in southern Illinois. Benton is so small.
How small is it?
God, you people are good. Well, Benton is so small that pretty much everybody knows everybody else. And it's so small that when I walk into some place of business and get the "you ain't from around here" look, and I introduce myself, what people really want to know, and sometimes they're bold enough to ask, is, "Who are your people? Who are your people?" And I say, "I am Allie Jean Hungate's daughter, Bessie Korn's granddaughter." And simply by saying those names, they know who I am and who all my kinfolks are, and they also know we're probably too closely related to date. So then it's all okay, and they know I'm one of them, sort of. And that's kind of what the writer of the Gospel of Matthew is trying to do a bit with that lengthy list of begats that I read. And the writer lists 52 generations of Jesus' ancestry, which from a genealogical perspective is pretty darned impressive. My parents were both into genealogy, which is the study of ancestry, tracing a person's family roots back through the generations. And my father wrote a book on the family genealogy in which he traced our American ancestors back 12 generations, and some other ancestors back in England back to the 800s. And he was very proud of that because that was admittedly a remarkable achievement to have gathered all that information, especially when you consider he did it in the 60s and 70s prior to the internet. So what does that say about me? Well, I think basically nothing whatsoever. All it shows is that I'm pretty much the waspiest of wasps, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, which is not necessarily anything to be proud of, especially when you consider I really had nothing to do with it, except being born. But it doesn't say anything about who I am, really. There's an old saying, it doesn't matter how tall your granddad was, you have to do your own growing up. So what does Jesus' genealogy say about him? Why does Matthew start his story with that? Well, Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience. He's telling us who Jesus' people are, like I do when I walk into a store in Benton. And just like my lineage proves that I am pretty much nothing but a wasp, Jesus' lineage proves that he is very, very Jewish. And the gospel places Jesus squarely in the line of the ancient patriarchs and kings of Israel, therefore legitimizing the Messiah's human and divine origins. And Matthew wants to present the central character of his gospel, Jesus, in a way that arouses the interest and touches the key concerns of his first readers who, like Jesus, were thoroughly Jewish. So Jesus comes from a long line of prophets and priests and kings, but if you look carefully at the genealogy, you might notice a few little hiccups along the way. He also comes from a long line that is filled with drama and rape and incest and downright human nastiness. Story for another sermon, though. But the upshot of all this genealogy is that through all these people, we come to the birth of Jesus, and so we have Christmas. But we're not at Christmas yet. This is the first Sunday of Advent, and Advent is defined as the arrival of a notable person or thing or event, and in the context of the church, Advent is the first season of the church calendar, consisting of the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas. And Christmas is coming faster than we think. What's today, the 3rd? 3rd, 10th, 17th. 3 weeks to Christmas Eve. Do I look like a deer caught in the headlights? Yeah. So Advent is about hope. Now, next week, we're going to tell you that Advent's about peace. And the week after, we're going to say it's about joy. And the week after that, it's about love. And all that's true too, but I'm right too, and today Advent is about hope. Now, you may have noticed earlier that when Tommy and Graham lit the first Advent candle, they talked about hope. And then we all sang a verse of a song about hope. Hope is a star that shines in the night, remember? It was like 10 minutes ago. So, Advent is about hope. Hope of the coming of the Christ child at Christmas, but also in the Christian tradition, hope of the coming of Christ again at the end of time and bringing about the dominion of God. And I'm here today to tell you that hope is not just a good feeling, a positive vibe. The great poet Emily Dickinson famously wrote a poem about hope. You may have heard it before. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And she suggests that hope is a very persistent thing, but also kind of a fragile and delicate thing. I think hope is much more than that. Hope is a fierce thing, a strong thing, and it gives us strength and keeps us going. Here's another poem by a woman named Caitlin Seda. You may have heard it before because I'm pretty sure I read it last year on the first Sunday of Advent. And I may make a habit of it on Hope Sunday. And it's quite a bit grittier. And I'm going to read it as written, since I think most of the kids are downstairs, so you won't have to explain why the pastor said those words you told them not to say. It's titled, Hope is not a bird, Emily, it's a sewer rat. Hope is not the thing with feathers that comes home to roost when you need it most. Hope is an ugly thing with teeth and claws and patchy fur that's seen some shit. It's what thrives in the discards and survives in the ugliest parts of our world, able to find a way to go on when nothing else can even find a way in. It's the gritty, nasty little carrier of such diseases as optimism, persistence, perseverance, and joy, transmissible as it drags its tail across your path and bites you in the ass. Hope is not some delicate, beautiful bird, Emily. It's a lowly little sewer rat that snorts pesticides like they were lines of coke and still shows up on time to work the next day, looking no worse for wear. That's the poem. And with all due apologies to Emily Dickinson, I think that's a much better description of hope. Hope is fierce. Hope knows that sometimes the human story sucks. And hope keeps on believing in it anyway. Friday past, December 1st, was World AIDS Day. And we've been commemorating World AIDS Day since 1988, and we've actually been dealing with AIDS quite a bit longer than that. I lost my first friend to AIDS in 1981, a high school buddy, although his obituary said he died of cancer because there was so much stigma. And part of the fight against AIDS has also been the fight against stigma and shame. Here's a little factoid about World AIDS Day that some of you may not know. One of the ways in which metropolitan community churches worldwide have led in the fight against AIDS is that this observance actually originated at the Metropolitan Community Church of San Diego, with the first International Prayer Vigil for AIDS in 1986. I see Brent nodding because he's old enough to remember. Well, the World Health Organization caught on a couple of years later, and we've been commemorating it worldwide ever since. But since that time, untold numbers have died, and millions have been infected around the world despite all of the incredible medical advances. And the AIDS quilts that I think they're hanging in the social hall. Are they there? I haven't even looked. They tell a bit of the history of AIDS from this place. And you can look at the dates on them and see that in the late 80s and 90s, AIDS absolutely devastated our community. And despite all of the incredible medical advances that have allowed people, at least people with access to first world medical care, to live out their lives in relative health, it is still a devastating disease worldwide. At our community multi-faith World AIDS Day last Thursday evening, Reverend June reminded us that trans women are 13 times more likely to contract HIV than other adults of reproductive age, and trans women of color in North America account for about half of all new HIV diagnoses. And we know that there are many places around the world, including places from whence many of our beloved refugees have come, where access to life-saving treatments is not available. It would be easy to lose hope. Indeed, there have been many times over the past 40-plus years of AIDS when I have felt utterly hopeless. Emily Dickinson's delicate, fragile hope was absolutely no use to me. But that sewer rat hope, that hope that's seen some stuff, that's the hope I needed at those times. Times when I was afraid, terrified of the losses I'd had and those that I saw ahead of us. Those times when I had to absolutely rage against the disease itself. It's hard to be angry at a virus, but I think we've learned how to do that. Against the disease, but also against the stigma and the shame. Times when I wanted to fight against those who tried to tell us in the early years that AIDS was a punishment of God. It is not. Times when I did fight and I needed that hope to keep fighting. And what on earth does that have to do with the convoluted genealogy of Jesus that I read to you? Well, there were times in that list of 52 generations when the line could have easily died out. Times when the family history could have ended. Like all those folks who died of AIDS and there was no one to carry on the line. And if you look closely at that genealogy, there are some deep and troubling problems, some shameful episodes, things that were stigmatized, but that's another sermon. I think I may have preached it last year. But that was then, and this is now. And through the grace of God, the line that ended in Jesus came down to us and brought us Christmas. And I think what Matthew is telling us in that long and convoluted genealogy is that the birth of Jesus, notwithstanding all the difficult bits, is a fulfillment of God's hopes and dreams for humanity and for all creation from time immemorial. And hope, for me, is the confident expectation that everything God desires for creation, all the good things, will come to pass. And like generations before me, I may not see every promise come to fruition in my lifetime, and I believe and hope that it will come to pass. But I think it's only in naming the names and facing the fears and exposing the stigma that there's healing. And that healing comes through hope for the future. Like we sang a few minutes ago, hope is that star that shows us how to keep on going. Not hope for some pie in the sky by and by, but a hope that helps us today. Hope that comes from seeing the persistence of God's care, even for those who have been shamed, and by God's using the most unlikely people to bring about the fulfillment of hope in God's story. God is working in us and through us. Hope in that. Amen.